Well, we're happy to be here with Sophie Freud today. It's February 22nd, 2022, and the Friends of Modern Architecture is here conducting one of our oral histories. And we would love to learn from Sophie, who is an original resident of Brownswood from 1956. First, to understand what brought you to this community, which is termed an intentional community, whether it was your husband's affiliation with MIT and the Grasses?
Yes, exactly, that's what it was. We lived in Cambridge at the time, we rented, and then my husband, who heard about this project at MIT, and he was interested in joining. It's really his project, and so we built this house, which used to be, we had 3 children, and so 3 bedrooms, and now we then split. I was married 40 years, which I think is quite a long time. But neither of us could leave this house, and so we split it.
Sophie, I'm curious, was the philosophy of the neighborhood that the Grasses
It was to be a community more than it ever was. That really didn't work out very well, the community part, although we met a few times over at the Wales. You know the Wales.
Ruth and Lang Wales.
Yes. Ruth just died a few months ago. And she stayed in her house for a long time as well. But so that Paul, what's his name, got to know the MIT people, and he was interested in building his own house, but the nicest part, this was just the balcony, the room that I live in, with the computer and the reading chair. Those are the 2 things that I do during the day. And I made a room out of it after we split the house. And I'm quite proud of, I had a contractor designing this nice balcony. Well, it's now a tree house.
It's lovely.
But it used to be just a balcony, as I said, it used to be an outdoor place, and he made it into an indoor place.
So you raised 3 children here.
Yes.
Was the Brownswood community, did it make it easier raising children by being in a family neighborhood? Do you think?
It wasn't okay. It was easy enough. And they all went to the Lincoln schools, both the regular lower school and the high school, all 3 of them. And they got a good enough education, which was, for me, it was then quite a commute. But for Paul, it wasn't, because his company moved to Maynard after they left MIT. And for him, it was a convenient place to live.
But you really worked your full-time, you were a full-time career raising children.
Yes.
And you went into Boston.
I did, yes. I left 1 year with the very first child. I stayed at home. It made me crazy.
Well, I remember you coming to work at the Simmons School of Social Work on your motorbike, which you must have driven in from Lincoln.
Yes, I did. And it got stolen twice.
In Boston.
In Boston.
So I didn't know whether the philosophy that the Grasses were interested, B.F. Skinner's Walden 2 or the Brudenhof Brothers Society, that philosophy resonated for Paul and you, or whether your choice to move here was based more on cost or for the idea of living in an intentional community.
It really was Paul's idea. He was in charge of where we lived. And I think he was attracted by the idea of building his own house. Of course, we had an architect, but now that you ask me, I don't know what attracted him the most. I think the idea of an MIT-connected community must have attracted him, because we were the third party. What happened is, it was important who joined, and the Grasses were the first, and the Wales were the second. And then when they distributed the lots, it depended on when you joined, about the choice of lot. And so we were the third family, and Paul picked this nice place with a view, and the lake wasn't there yet. Mm-hmm. You understand that Valley Pond was only a few years later.
Yes, yes. So you knew the Grasses well?
Not very well. Mm-hmm. No, we met them through this project. Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering how you chose the architect, Albert Brooks.
That was a friend of ours had used him for a modern house in the country, in Groton. He built them a house, and so that we followed their recommendation. Mm-hmm. He built about 3 houses, I think 2 or 3, no?
In Brownswood, yes.
Yes.
And
I'm not sure that Homer had the same. I don't think.
No, Homer did not. I think your neighbors, where Joel lives, the Friedmans, that house was Albert Brooks, who apparently graduated from the GSD in 1942.
Mr. Brooks?
Yes.
Oh, really?
And he worked in Walter Bochner's office for a period of time. But apparently he went on to design churches.
Oh, really?
More frequently. Do you remember the working experience with him? Laying out the floor plan and the bedrooms and the kitchen?
I don't remember, no. I think it was all Paul's ideas. Uh-huh. And my idea was to make a room out of this balcony. You know, there were big glass doors there. Mm-hmm. And when the weather got nice, we would eat out there. Mm-hmm. But I'm very proud that my son thought, oh, you're going to destroy the house by doing that. But in reality, that's where I live.
That's wonderful.
I mean, that's where I spent my day.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you have another favorite aspect of the house when you were bringing up your children here?
It was a good place to bring up children. I'm thinking mostly of the schools being good enough so we didn't have to use publics, meaning it was a public school, but we didn't have to use the private schools. And it both saved money, and it was also my idea of preferring a public school to a private school. One of the important things you should really know is that we were among this community, had several Jewish families, and we were one of them. But in Lincoln, there were very few Jewish families at the time. That has changed radically now.
So was that an important aspect for you?
Well, it was My children blame me that I send them to schools where they were, especially the oldest, she had just one other Jewish who also was Browns, was the Browns,
Yes.
as a Jewish member of the class. And one of the teachers really still resent her. I wrote a little story about that. Mrs. Mahoney actually was a little anti-Semitic.
So that was an apparent feeling back in the 50s.
Well, she was the only person that I can name. We had no bad experiences otherwise, but I think we had some problems. I did always with her as the only person who made us feel, she had anti-Semitic feelings.
Mm. Well, I'm glad she had a friend to be with in class.
It was not her friend. He just happened to live here. He's become one of the selectmen, no? Mr.
Yes, he was.
What is Peter? Is
Peter
his name?
Braun. Yes.
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 So he stayed in Lincoln.
Was Paul an engineer or a physicist?
Yes.
And did he work with any of the other men or residents in the neighborhood in his engineering career?
He worked for Nuclear Metals. As I said, they moved to Maynard, and then I think they were asked. I think they have closed now because they worked with metals that are forbidden in Massachusetts. It was not my idea of. I'm a pacifist, you see, so that I was not happy about his job.
Mm. It must have been difficult the beginning years because I think every resident was drawn in to make decisions about the neighborhood. Paul was probably the one on the front line of that, working with neighbors to make decisions about even naming the roads and other elements.
Yes, we met a few times. I remember one meeting in the Wales house, and we had a common machine to clean the floors, and it circulated.
You
among
shared
families. Yeah, I'm not a big cleaner, but we did have that, and some of the families had babysitting arrangements between themselves, but I had, since I was working, I had somebody who come and stay with the children, and so we didn't use, although my children babysat, as they grew up, they babysat for other families.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't have neighbors babysitting for us. I don't know, it didn't work out that way.
Mm-hmm. Was Nina Pollenbaum a friend of yours?
No, she was just an acquaintance.
Mm-hmm.
I had two friends, Mary Eckerhart, and she died,
No.
but she left her husband. But she was a very close friend. And then there was a family called Kramer, and I think her name was Barbara. I'm not sure. but she was another friend. So I had two friends in the neighborhood, which was very nice, especially Mary.
Mm.
And I would visit her. She moved to Little Compton, and I visited her sometimes.
There was a newspaper that was produced for the neighborhood. I think it was called the Fence Viewer.
Oh, yes?
I was wondering if that was part of, if you submitted any articles or...
No, I don't. I remember the name, the Fence Viewer. I didn't remember that we had a newspaper. Funny what one forgets and what one remembers.
Sophie, are there other aspects of living here or in Lincoln that stand out for you?
Well, I mentioned Mrs. Mahoney, and then I wrote a story about, you see, I've written 2 books, and one has stories in it, and Mrs. Mahoney is in one of the stories.
What book is that?
It's called My 3 Mothers and Other Passions. And my second book is called Living in the Shadow of the Freud Family. And that was 10 years later. But the first book was just a combination of stories I had written for various, journals and put all together. I'm pleased that I got especially my second book, which is mostly letters actually, that I found, and I'm pleased I still got that done. But my memory was actually better than it is now.
That's wonderful.
Well, you have other questions for me?
I don't know if Sandy or Mark have any that you'd like to ask, or.
I'm intrigued by the shadow of the Freud family. Are you related to Sigmund Freud?
Yes, he's my grandfather.
Oh, really? Wow.
I came to this country only at the age of 18, so I had to, my accent, I'm sorry about that, I never lost my accent.
No, you speak very well.
Subtle but charming.
Well, I have a PhD and I'm a professor emerita, and so I made up for it.
What is your PhD in, Sophie?
Well, I went to the Heller School at Brandeis, so it's their school of social policy. But I became a clinical social worker as my first job. And I kept that job for quite a few years before I went back to, not back to Brandeis, but then I went to Brandeis to get a PhD, and then I was a professor there.
I guess I am curious about your observations of society here in America in the 50s and 60s, if there were general observations or...
Well, my current observation is that it's all about money. Everything, even politics, all they want is donations. I think everything is about money. What you listen to, and everyone wants donations. I get 20 demands for please send us money for good causes. I only get good causes, and I feel bad that, when I send money, then I immediately get another demand, and the more I send, the more demands I get, so that now I'm a little sore at this country and what people do. They persecute each other, they sit on computers and write threatening letters. I have a feeling there's a whole army of people, not in Massachusetts necessarily, who does nothing but write threatening letters to people who count the votes or who get elected.
I think it's one of the fallouts of our connectedness through the computer, unfortunately.
Yes.
But I guess,
But you want to know way back.
well, yes, I guess, I know, well, you think of Europe and you think of a more philosophically based society, and, you know, compared to America that's, you know, a capitalistic based society. I mean, it does feel like we haven't had the conversations that need to be had. But getting back to architecture, I'm just curious, Sophie, if you were particularly drawn to the modern architecture in Germany or Austria.
I have one uncle who was an architect. I don't know if you know that.
No, I didn't know that.
Sigmund Freud had 6 children, and one of them was an architect. And his son became a very famous painter. Lucian Freud, you must have heard.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
Huh.
So he's my first cousin. But Ernst himself wanted to be a painter and was not allowed to be a painter because painters usually don't earn enough money. But Ernst then became an architect, and people have sent me a few houses that he built, still in Germany or Austria, but I'm not sure. I had them somewhere, but I couldn't find them. So that I have an architect as a first uncle.
Did you grow up in, which country did you grow up in?
Well, I was almost 14. I grew up in Vienna, and then there was this Anschluss, and thanks to my famous grandfather, we left within a few months after the Anschluss. So I was 14 in France. So I stayed 2 years in Paris, almost 2 years. And then the Germans came again a second time, and we moved by bicycle to Nice. And it was a good place to be because it was, France had an occupied zone and a non-occupied zone. And luckily Nice, I'm talking about Nice,
Yes.
it was in the non-occupied zone. So we did not, my grandmother went to Biarritz, which was occupied zone, and she got sent to Auschwitz and got killed there. So we were lucky to survive in Nice. And then about a year and a half, and then we were able, then we spent almost a year in Casablanca because our visa expired, and they wouldn't let us in without the visa, just for one day, because there was a ship that came from Portugal via Casablanca and then went to America, and the ship was late just by one day, and so we had to stay in Casablanca, which was a nice place for us to stay.
For what period of time?
8 months.
And did you bicycle from Paris to Nice?
No, we bicycled, and we stayed on a farm, a brick farm, for that summer. the summer of 1940 it was. And then from there we got a train to Nice. But we stayed during the summer with our bicycles in a place called Castellones. And many years later, my son and I visited the village where we had stayed, but everyone was dead. Everyone, the people where we had lived, and they had already, so there was nobody that we remembered.
Did a French family take you in there? Where did
No,
you?
we rented. There was a little money that we had left, and we rented a room in a French. They made bricks. It was not a real farm, although they had their own garden, but they made bricks. It was wine country. The people around us all had vineyards.
When did you finally get to America?
As I said, I was 18 in November 1942. I was already 18 years old.
Mm-hmm. And did you come directly to Boston?
Well, I had very rich relatives in New York City, and they enrolled me at Radcliffe, which was I knew nothing about this country. I didn't know that Radcliffe was such an elitist school, but that's where I ended up, without money, however. So it was not an easy time in my life.
Yes. Did you know English at
I had learned high school English, and I knew enough English to pass the exam. But, you know, I had to, it was not college English, and so I had to work very hard. It was not an easy time in my life.
Now, were you familiar with Walter Gropius?
I just know that name, of course, but I was not familiar with him, and you know, we didn't go to Lincoln. Lincoln was a new place for me. It just happened that they had this Brown's Wood place. I would not have ended up here most of my life. So that life is so strange.
It's serendipitous so often, because in 1942 then finally some women were able to matriculate to Harvard, and so several
At the time,
Radcliffe
it was
students.
just the year that they started. I had several Harvard classes, and most of my classes were already with Harvard students, so that it was the very year that they started to meld the two colleges.
Can you describe some of that experience? Enrollment was low during the war, but what did it feel like going to classes at Radcliffe and at Harvard?
Well, mostly I had to learn English, and I started out as an au pair student. You know, I lived with a family. You know what am I referring to when I said au pair student?
Helping out with their children?
Yes, you had 3 hours a day for your room and board. But I started in February. I started Radcliffe in February, which was not sort of the middle of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So they put me in with a family of Chinese missionaries who took in students because they couldn't be missionaries in Cambridge. But I was into being at the time a communist, and I didn't like to live. In other words, I was not sympathetic to their mission anyway. I'm against religion. So that I just stayed there for one semester, and then I looked for a room as an au pair girl. Then the woman placed me with a Viennese family who had known, the woman in the family was a colleague of my mother's in Vienna. It was, and my mother had been a speech therapist. She just got these days, she's being nominated as an honorary speech therapist in Vienna to send me a whole book about where she's one of the characters. So I became a quasi-daughter to this couple, which was good and bad because with a quasi-daughter you don't count the hours. So that eventually I ended up in a dorm, eventually my last year there at Radcliffe.
What did you study?
I ended up with psychology, which I hadn't meant to be, but it was the one area where I had some background, and it was the easiest to be. But at one point I thought of becoming an architect, actually, which was not at all my thing.
Do you have memories of your grandfather?
Yes, I knew him quite well. We visited every Sunday for many years. But he had 5 sisters, and one sister, her name was Anna, married a brother of my grandmother. So there were 2 marriages in the same family. And they were sent to America because they were not, they had nothing to offer. So that sister survived into old age, and her son became the head of public relations here in this country, Edward Bernays. You know that name?
Yes.
He's the son of that marriage.
Interesting.
And he paid for my whole college education. So I was lucky to have these rich relatives who were very kind to me.
Is that Anne Bernays' family?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's a writer.
Writer,
It's her parents.
Mm-hmm. And so they were a relative.
Not so distant.
A cousin, no, not so distant.
Edward Bernays was my grandfather's nephew.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother's nephew as well.
Mm-hmm.
There were these 2 marriages.
Mm-hmm.
Because my grandmother was Martha Bernays. So her brother married a sister of my grandfather. And I was lucky enough that they took an interest a kind interest in me and sent me to Radcliffe. For 4 years, 3 years, they paid my entire Radcliffe education. But I came to Cambridge with $10 that Mrs. Bernays had given me as a gift. And it wasn't very much money to manage.
Sophie, did you know Frances Corton? I think she was in the Radcliffe, the 1942 class at Radcliffe and Harvard. And she was an architect here in Lincoln who worked with Konstantin Pertsov.
A cousin of Pertsov?
She was an associate architect with Konstantin Pertsov.
I see.
That name doesn't ring a bell.
No.
And did you know Konstantin Pertsov here in Lincoln?
No, I didn't.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know if you knew any of the other architects working in town, but I think it sounds like your work was absorbing and you were really committed to your work in town. It was a practicing clinical social worker.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Mrs. de Normandy came to, which was nice, but I didn't take advantage of it. She invited me, said I would be welcome at her church, which was nice of her to do.
Yes.
But a little, it wasn't my church. But at the time, people gave each other gifts when you moved in. Remember that there was a time?
The welcoming committee in town?
The housewarming gifts.
It had a name.
Housewarming gifts.
Well, there was a welcome
A
committee.
welcome wagon.
Welcome wagon?
Yes, that's what it was called. That stopped. But at the time, I don't remember the gifts, but we were included in that.
It was nice.
So you too?
And my mother used to do that.
Oh, she did?
Mm-hmm.
You were old Lincolnite?
No, in another state.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What town was that?
It's a very small town in New York,
Uh-huh.
in the Hudson River Valley.
They had the same welcome wagon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you remember that?
I remember that as a strange thing. That nowhere else there was such a thing. But I used to love going to town meetings. I no longer go, but
I remember you, yes, late you went. I remember not too long ago. And was there a temple close by, nearby?
We are not religious. We are assimilated Jews. So that actually I'm against religion. I think it just makes trouble between people. So that I didn't know that Lincoln was a place where there were no Jews. It was not something I looked into. I was more interested in the school system. But my son was 1 year old when we moved, so I always remember when we moved. But the other children, my oldest daughter had already started education in Cambridge, where we lived before that. And she went to a private school in Cambridge and then to the first grade in Lincoln. But the other children went to the Lincoln Nursery School. I was quite happy with the high school. They had professor there who was into geography, Mr. Elliot. Do any of you remember him? Are you a Lincoln man?
I'm from central Minnesota.
Oh,
Yeah.
I have lived here now for 60 years already. Mr. Elliot he loved geography, but he was not at the high school. He was at the lower school, you know.
At the Brooks School?
In the Brooks School, yes. And then there was Mr. Mitchell in the high school. None of your children went to the high school?
No, we're a different generation. Our children are a different generation, so
But
the teachers have changed.
Which generation are they?
Well, our children are in their 30s, so they weren't in high school.
So they were in high school in 1996, around then.
Oh, later.
Late-
There was
the late
Mr.
90s,
Mitchell was no
90s.
longer there.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't remember that name.
Yeah, but the Lincoln schools did enjoy a very great reputation during the 50s, I think. And do you remember when the Lincoln School was built, the Smith School? Lawrence Anderson designed the Smith School.
No, I don't remember. They're now redoing all the schools. I don't know if that was necessary or not. It made our taxes go higher.
When is your birthday, Sophie?
August 6th. It's not a good day because that's when did Hiroshima, same
that's
day
right.
as Hiroshima, so everyone can remember it. I'm sorry to have the same birthday. And my father's birthday is the same day as the Japanese Pearl Harbor.
Oh, December 6th.
Well, his birthday was actually December 7th, but very close. Are you sure it was the 6th, not the 7th?
I think you're right.
So we have these bad birthdays to remember.
Sophie, did you know the name Adolf Loos, who was an Austrian architect? I was just curious if that architect stood out in your family's
No.
awareness. And here in Lincoln, did you know Walter Bogner, who was Austrian? His family was Austrian.
No,
No.
I didn't know them. They were at the same time as I was here?
Yes, he designed his house in Lincoln in 1939.
I see.
So this is curious.
No, I never,
Yeah.
the name doesn't even sound familiar.
So do you remember Albert Brooks at all, the architect?
No, I don't.
Okay. Yeah.
But I know that the main ideas probably came from my husband, who knew, you know, where he knew the location, and as I said, we were the third couple that could choose the place where they wanted their house, and so that I think he liked the location.
Sophie, do you remember what you might have thought when you saw Ruth Wales's home and how it was placed in among all those rocks? Did that have an impression on you?
Not really, no. I just know her. We were not friends. I mean, we were not enemies, but we were not friends. We were acquaintances. I make a big difference between a friend and an acquaintance. That's a European thing.
Well, I think having engineer husbands, I'm sure this is a very well-built house. It feels very solid.
I have a feeling we have a finished basement, but now that stairs are not so comfortable. I haven't gone down there for a little while, but my cleaning woman, who comes once a week, If waters the plant that I have in the basement. But it is a finished basement. For a while. People could really, with a big bedroom and living room and all that, and the kitchen and bathroom. So there's a whole apartment downstairs that's not being used.
Accommodating house.
If you want to look at it, you can.
We'd love to. I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all the questions I have right now.
Mhm.
Thank you very much for
Well, you're
spending
most
this time with
welcome.
us.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
A very nice
Uh,
interview.
I should just say that your house was built in 1956.
Yes.
Yeah. So
N-
it's been a.
We moved in in 56, so it was built just before that, of course. But then, as I said, we split it. And so now Norman Levy, he's my last tenant, has been here for a while. And he takes care of the snow plowing and things like that.
But what a wonderful place to live amongst the trees and the
Yes,
rocks.
I love my trees, I must say. They're like friends.
Oh, well, thank you, Sophie.
And then now I take the car down to Valley Pond. You know, we haven't talked at all about Valley Pond,
That's true.
which is such an important part of this whole neighborhood. I
Would
used
you?
to.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about it because I know how it's sublime. It's this.
I used to walk down the hill. Now I take the car, but it's very nice for me to have a swimming place that is so close. And I used to go to Walden Pond, which I really loved, swim across it. I was used to be a master swimmer. I would go all the way across and come back, all in one swim. But now I just go down here and I still swim a little.
My daughter was telling me this morning she remembers you from this summer, getting in and swimming
Here,
at Valley Pond.
she's part of a Valley Pond community.
Just this past year for the first time.
I see.
So
Oh, she saw me. The lifeguards helped me get in and out.
yeah.
They're very nice to me. Because I'm a little wobbling, but they help me get in and out.
Yeah, it's such good exercise.
It is good exercise, but I thought, I didn't ask them to help me. They just noticed that I was wobbling in the water, and so they helped me.
So
They
nice.
just noticed it, which was to their credit.
Yes.
I wouldn't have asked them because I don't like to ask things like that.
And it didn't exist when you first moved in?
And no.
Yeah.
Rani Grass had that idea. It was we use the Lincoln water supply, and then there a big pond. You haven't seen it. It sounds like you have never seen it.
I have, yeah, I've seen it.
Oh, you have seen
Yeah,
it.
and there's a dam on one side.
So you know that there's the big pond and then the swimming pond and then a dirty little pond. They're very particular. You're not allowed to swim in the big pond. And the animals are not allowed because it's part of the water supply. So that we have a big advantage of having. For me, it's a big thing to be able to just get into my car and in 5 minutes I'm there. And I have lifeguards who pay attention to my disabilities.
Was there a lake in Vienna or a river or?
No, but we live near the Donau Canal, quite opposite. The Donau Canal is a channel that the big Donau makes through the city. And so we lived next to that canal.
So you swam there?
No, it was not a swimming place. No, we went to Italy for our summer vacation, which on the Adriatic, Italy.
Oh, where did you go?
It was a place called Grado. You know Italy a little bit?
Well, my son-in-law is from the Abruzzo region, which is on the Adriatic. So I know it a little bit.
Grado was an island that they made a bridge to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very near Trieste.
Okay.
Up,
Yes.
up on the, you know, where the boat lands. And that's, we went for many summers, we went to Grado. Which
It's
was
supposed to
very
be lovely
nice.
there. Heard people talk about it.
Well, I thank you for having come. And,
Thank you.
and if you think of something after talking to, have you talked to Homer yet?
Not yet.
But
I
if
did a
you-
few years ago, a little bit, but I'd like to again. So his wife passed away.
First she left him and went to live with a man that she had known in her youth in Little Compton. And she had started to paint landscapes, very nice landscapes. But then she died. I think she had had an illness as a child, a heart illness. What do you call it when a child has a heart illness?
A heart murmur?
I think
Or rheumatic fever affects your heart.
rheumatic, yes.
Fever.
She had a rheumatic fever as a child,
Mhm.
so she died rather prematurely.
Mm.
But my daughter is still friends with her daughter, Gretchen,
Mhm.
so that the children had good friends in this community because there were the Horwitzes. You know that family?
Yes, I know Wendy Horowitz,
Oh,
And,
yeah.
Conant
Mhm.
Road.
and her mother died recently, I think.
Mm.
And Matthew Horwitz was my son's good friend, a very close friendship. He lives now in the state of Washington, but they have kept up their friendship.
Mm.
So the children had good friends that they, you know, was very important, of course.
Very important.
And I found two friends in this community, which was all I had time for anyway.
Oh, well, thanks again, Sophia. And so maybe if we could take some pictures of the house.
Yes,
That would
and
be
if you
great.
want to go.